cherry cola. Let's get into it, man.
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome back. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Welcome back, guys. Missed ya. We will do call-in tonight. I know it's been a minute. I think the last one was last Tuesday, maybe. So there's lots to discuss. I'm pretty sure you have a lot of things to say. Shout out to those of you watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter, and welcome all. Gonna give quick shout outs to people in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and dive right in. What's going on, Lorez says, we geit Estier, Sabrina, Eric, and Sabby fam. Help Sab out by watching the ads and smashing the like. Between those two, Trump wins like in 2016. People felt betrayed by Biden and Obama. Go ahead and answer that poll if you haven't had a chance to do so. What's going on, Dabby Dabs? I voted not sure because Goldman Sachs, Raytheon, Big Oil, and Big Pharma wasn't a fourth option. They win whether we elect a D or an R. Also, because 80 plus with dementia, Biden might croak first. Shout out to Hannah G says, Tim, who? We'll get into that story. We'll get into that story. Shout out to El Mythical says, I would put money on Trump if legal to bet in my state. What's going on? ACAB says, I am getting every election to where I hate it because of the bullying and gaslighting that goes on. My only goals are to stand my ground and not let partisan abuse speak the truth. Shout out to Mark says, Sabby. Greetings, Bryce says, sup, everyone. Waiting for another banger from Sabby. What's going on? Notori says, hey, everybody, let's get loca. Shout out to Gamer for Life says, hello. Gamer's always around. Shout out to Corey, who's a Sabby member, says, Sabby Tuesday, let's go. Shout out to V. Olifsdorter. 0 for Biden, of course, with a wink there, with a little bit of a wink. What's going on? Kill your burgers. Kerr, yay, doobie doos. Shout out to Leora says, hey, everyone. Greetings. Lawrence, who's a Sabby member, says, I made it. Shout out to Angela, who's also a Sabby member, says, greetings all and hope everyone's having a good week so far. Hashtag like button smash. What's going on? Mr. E-Man says, hi, Sabs. Hello. Is it me you're looking for? Shout out to Roger Meadows, who's also a Sabby member, says, wow, yellow. Yes. It is getting warmer. We're trying to creep there, at least in Eastern Massachusetts. So it's time to bring out the bright hues. Shout out to Eric, who's a Sabby member, says, happy new week to all lefty friends. Greetings, Dr. Nick says, hi, everybody. What's going on? Eric Huso says, history repeats itself, first as tragedy, second as farce. We shall see what will happen. What's going on? Chicago Grr81 says, play peppers, hashtag heat culture. Yeah, I'm not using the word heat for a while. We're destroyed by the Miami Heat, okay? We were destroyed by them. It's done. Done. I'm still bitter. Shout out to Kim says, hi, Sabby. Greetings, where he says, hey, everybody. Everybody. Rock your body. Backstreet's back. All right. I forgot to sign into Politics TV. I just realized that. It might be too late now. Shoot. Screw it. I'll have to catch back up next time. Anywho, let's go ahead and dive right in. I want to start off by giving a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. You are holding down the fort over here. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, the members. You can see all of their names here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there as well. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate that support. Okie doke. Let's go ahead and dive into that thumbnail, guys. I do want to get started with these stories. It has been an interesting week. I think I might have some pretty interesting news for you when I come back on Thursday in reference to the 2024 election as well. Tonight, we are discussing Bill Gates, RFK Jr., and Jeffrey Epstein alert. Why are all of them in a square together? Yes, I do have something to say about that. Bill Gates and RFK Jr., who apparently, we talked about Bill Gates having a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein on the show before. There's more information that's come out about that. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about where RFK Jr. fits into this category as well. We're also going to discuss Trump leads Biden by 7 points as Tim Scott jumps into the race. Yes, here we go. We'll also discuss the G7 summit. And there's Biden and Zelensky there to give you an idea what that is more so about this time around. And we're also going to discuss those New York ballot measure wins. So should be a pretty interesting night. I need to go ahead and log into typing and see. Should be a pretty interesting night. First, I do want to go ahead and get started with discussing the G7 summit. For those of you who are not aware what that is, let's go ahead and dive into the explanation first, and then we'll discuss what's happening in Hiroshima. The G7 summit is an international forum held annually for the leaders of the G7 member states of, make this bigger for you, for the people who have to sit in the back. Member states of France, the US, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, Italy, and Canada in order of rotating presidency, as well as the EU. Now, some of the features that they'll usually discuss at the G7 summit, the leaders of the G7 would share fundamental values such as freedom, democracy, and human rights. This is really interesting. The democracy piece and the human rights piece in reference to the United States. That's interesting. Exchange candid views on important challenges the international community is facing at that time, such as the global economy, regional affairs, and various global issues, and issue a document as an outcome of such discussions. With the leadership of the leaders of the G7, which shares fundamental values, the G7 has effectively responded to important challenges that the international community will face. What was interesting there is that they did not mention war. And that's interesting because one of the top discussions at the G7 summit was this war with Russia and Ukraine. And I found it interesting that in the freedom and democracy that they laid out there in reference to their values, they didn't mention anything about warfare. So pay close attention to that. So we're going to start off with this clip here from Morning Joe, which discusses the opening day of the G7 summit, which of course includes the war in Ukraine. Let's get started.
Okay, so let's begin with the opening of the G7 summit wrapping up in Hiroshima with the group of 7 leaders attending a working dinner together after a full slate of cultural events held earlier in the day. On Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to join the summit in person to see commitments for more aid in his country's fight against Russia.
So that was just this past Sunday. We'll get into that as well.
Bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli live in Hiroshima. Mike, what's the latest?
Well, Mika, obviously there's a very jam-packed agenda for the G7 leaders here after the first of 3 days for this G7 summit. They're talking about everything from the state of the global economy, how to combat inflation, dealing with supply chains, competition with China. But at the very top of this agenda has always been the continued battle in Ukraine and the ongoing efforts by the G7 other allies to support Ukraine in that effort. There was a strong statement issued by the G7 leaders after their first working session today, pledging their continued support for Ukraine militarily, as well as through security and humanitarian.
Let's pause there for just a second. So he just told you that they're gathering and they all have agreed to continue to support Ukraine militarily. That's the first one. We'll get into the other issues. Now, I want to remind you right now, Joe Biden is trying to negotiate with Republicans in reference to the debt ceiling. Now, we can argue back and forth about whether the debt ceiling is actually real. MMT peeps will tell you that the debt ceiling doesn't even really exist. It's not really a real thing, so to speak, right? But right now, he's actually trying to negotiate and considering reducing spending in reference to the social programs just to get this debt ceiling budget passed. So he's willing to take away money from the social programs, but of course not from the defense budget. And this is something that we've been pretty vocal about before on the show. And now you hear that in reference to the G7 summit, that one of the top agenda items is to send more money to Ukraine for military aid. So you're arguing about the debt ceiling in this country, which you can't seem to figure out and negotiate with. You're willing to take money away from social programs instead of taking money away from the defense budget, because if they reduce that defense budget, then they have to try to justify if they have that money to send to Ukraine. And that's what this is really all about. So these two things are connected. And I've heard people talk about the debt ceiling as a separate thing and the G7 as a separate thing, but they're really connected issues here in reference to the United States government. Zelensky appearing at the G7 summit to ask for more money. When is enough enough? How much more money are these countries supposed to give him until the people in their countries are poor? We can't give everyone health care in this country, but we can try to find a way to continue to give more money to Ukraine. Let's go on. Just something I want you to think about. Let's go back a little bit because he was mentioning humanitarian pieces here.
As well as through security and humanitarian assistance. And the fact that we're now confirming that President Zelensky will attend this summit in person on Sunday just speaks to that continued focus. We've seen President Zelensky on something of a world tour. He, over the course of the past week, has visited the capitals of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Rome, even met with Pope Francis, and today setting foot in Saudi Arabia, attending that Arab summit there as an indication of his efforts to really continue to build support for Ukraine ahead of this spring offensive. As part of the sanctions that are being announced today, we're seeing a continued unified front among the G7 efforts to really target Russia where it hurts, both their continued efforts to finance the ongoing war, but also to get around some of the evasive tactics that Russia has been making for sanctions that were already in place. Now,
so these countries, their leaders have decided to get together and to continue to implement sanctions on Russia, as he said, where it hurts. But you have to keep in mind that those sanctions also hurt people in their countries as well, not just Russia. You have the UK, you have France. Macron can't even figure out what to do with people in his own country right now. That's why there's protests there. So they're willing to allow people in their own country to continue to struggle in order to support Zelensky until the last Ukrainian. Remember what they said at the WEF? We are willing to go until the last one is standing. Let's go on.
Now, Mika, we also know, of course, that the looming debt ceiling crisis back home has also been overshadowing this. And we saw President Biden, in fact, cut short his participation at the G7 leaders dinner this evening here so that he can get a fresh update from his team as they start their day back there at home Friday morning. White House tweet from an earlier update that the president got indicated that the president is continues to be confident that they'll avert a default. And in fact, conversations Kristen Welker and I have just been having with White House officials speak to that optimism as well. They're not ruling out, in fact, that the president might speak with Speaker McCarthy on Sunday just before he ends his participation in the G7 summit to head back home. So there is that continued optimism. You can understand why the president wants to project that optimism, because a default in the United States would not just devastate our own economy, but it would have ripple effects throughout the world. So it's a top concern.
Hold on to that piece that he just said right there. A default in our own economy would have ripple effects, with the debt ceiling would have ripple effects, not just with our own economy, but also throughout the world. In other words, they wouldn't be able to give money to Ukraine. That's what that really means when he says throughout the world. If they can't figure this out, they can't balance this, figure out this debt ceiling, how they want this to go. That means that if we have that default, then we're not going to be able to send billions of dollars to Ukraine. And that's what he means by throughout the world. That's what this is really about. Terrible, terrible stuff.
Of the other G7 leaders here as well.
All right, NBC's Mike Memoli reporting live from Hiroshima. Thank you very much for that report. Now, Mike.
Okay, so that was the opening day remarks, but for those who are not aware, there are also protests that are happening at the G7 summit. Now, these are people who came out to protest because they don't want a nuclear war. And they know what is being discussed at this G7 summit. They know the top priority is this war with Russia and Ukraine and giving Zelensky more money. Now, Wyatt Reed tweeted this out. He said, big protest condemns the imperialist G7 summit happening in Hiroshima. For Biden to bring the nuclear football to a city where the U.S. killed over 100,000 civilians with a nuclear bomb is a grave offense to the victims' memory. That's what the demonstrators are saying. So you have to remember, this is probably not the best location to have a discussion about funding war, considering what happened in Hiroshima. So you have to remember that. So obviously some of the people there may be a little bit on the edge of their seats. They may be a little bit frazzled, a little bit afraid, because they have memories of what happened before when you want to talk about a nuclear war. Let's hear what some of the protesters had to say. And we'll show you another clip as well from Democracy Now! So here are some of the protesters. Yep. And there's more footage as well. It's like, they're not stupid here. They know what these talks are really about. And no, like, they don't want to be put in harm's way in reference to a nuclear war. I don't think anyone really does. Anyone who has, their right mind really does. But there was also a Hiroshima survivor that spoke to Democracy Now! And I think you need to hear what she had to say. This just brings back bad memories for people who lived through it, the people who were there during that time. But not only those people who were there during that time, even some of the younger people, they know this part of their history. So listen to this clip here from Democracy Now! I want you to hear what the Hiroshima survivor has to say in reference to the G7 summit.
The G7 summit wrapped up Sunday in Hiroshima, Japan. Much of the summit focused on two issues, the war in Ukraine and China. President Biden announced $375 million more in military aid for Ukraine. He also pledged to begin training.
She said that very quickly, so I just want to say that for you again. $375 million in aid for Ukraine. All this money just going out the door for another country. All this money going out the door. And we just kick people off of Medicaid.
Ukrainian forces on flying U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets. Biden did not offer to send any F-16s, but the U.S. has lifted its opposition to allies supplying the warplanes to Ukraine. Britain and the Netherlands have announced plans to work together to help provide Ukraine F-16s. President Biden spoke Sunday.
You know, in my private meeting with President Zelensky after the G7 meeting and with his staff, I told him the United States, together with our allies and partners, is going to begin training Ukrainian pilots in fourth-generation fighter aircraft, including F-16s, to strengthen Ukraine's Air Force as part of a long-term commitment to Ukraine's ability to defend itself. I have a flat assurance from Zelensky that they will not use it to go on and move into Russian geographic territory.
And you believe that? He got a handshake from Zelensky and a nod that they are not going to proceed into Russian geographic territory. And you can just take him at his word. Okay.
But wherever Russian troops are within Ukraine and the area, they would be able to do that.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who attended the G7 in Hiroshima, thanked Biden for his support.
We are very thankful. I think it will give us more strong positions on the battlefield. So,
give him more strong positions on the battlefield. How are they getting strong positions on the battlefield? How? Is there anyone out there who really believes that they would be able to defeat Russia? Russia has an ally in China. Russia is a part of BRICS. Like, do really believe this, guys? I never thought from the get-go that this is really about winning. I don't think this is about winning. I think this is just about profit. Julian Assange said this best when he said the goal is not to win. The goal is to have a forever war, so you can continue to funnel the money in. That's what this is really about. But do people, honestly, sitting at home, do they seriously believe that Ukraine stands a chance against Russia winning this war, no matter how many weapons that you send them?
we're very thankful that is a new package. I really didn't know the details, but I know that you gave us very big package during this year. It's more than 37 billion.
He hasn't given us that package.
My appreciations. We never forget. Thank you.
While in Hiroshima, President Biden and other world leaders paid tribute to the victims of the world's first nuclear attack, the U.S. bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, laying wreaths at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial and planting a tree. But President Biden did not issue an apology for the attack. A group of anti-nuclear activists rallied on the streets.
Japan and the United States are trying to conduct a war of aggression on China. I am protesting because I absolutely cannot accept the fact that they are in Hiroshima, a place where an atomic bomb was dropped, trying to hold a meeting to start a nuclear war.
Exactly. It's the optics, you know. And I like seeing the protesters out there because that tells me that more people are waking up. What did he just tell you? He said, we do not need to try to escalate any type of war with China. And I totally get that and totally understand. But the fact that they're out there and they're like, look, we know what this summit is really about. We know what's really happening here. That is a good sign that more people are starting to see this.
I'm absolutely against the war. I'm against using nuclear weapons. That is why I'm here. This summit is being held to prepare for a nuclear war, so we, the Union, need to do whatever we can to protest against it.
We go now to Hiroshima, where we're joined by Setsuko Thurlow, who survived the U.S. bombing of Hiroshima in 1945 that killed about 140,000 people.
If you think about it, that really wasn't that long ago, 1945.
She's devoted her life to nuclear disarmament and the ban treaty process. In 2017, she was chosen to accept the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN. She's joining us on the phone from Hiroshima. It's great to have you back with us, Setsuko Thurlow. If you can respond to the G7 meeting and the outcome this weekend held in Hiroshima, where you are.
Well, I came to Hiroshima from Canada, where I live. I wanted to be part of this whole excitement that the world leaders are coming to Hiroshima and to discuss the nuclear disarmament. And the people here are so excited, so happy to have the opportunity to give them to give the leaders the opportunity to be with us, to be in the center of the calamity and catastrophe, and to have a profound encounter themselves with the meaning of the dawn of the nuclear age. And people had a great anticipation and excitement. They prepared for this with all kinds of recommendations to the leaders, but somehow their wishes were not fully listened.
So she said that people there gave recommendations to the leaders who were present at the G7 summit, but their recommendations were not well received, so to speak. They weren't listened to. So continue to listen to what she says.
To put it bluntly, for us survivors who want nothing less than the total disarmament, total abolition of nuclear weapons, and the majority of the citizens of Japan who supports survivors' idea, to us it was nothing but a disaster.
Yep.
We are feeling more than frustration. It's a fury, anger, and a total disappointment.
She said the caption here is incorrect. Instead of fully, it's fury and anger. And she says that it's a total disappointment. Could you imagine what it must feel like to be a survivor of Hiroshima? And to see them having this meeting about a possibility of even like pushing towards any type of nuclear war. Could you imagine what that feels like? I don't know how many survivors are still alive, but this has to be triggering in a way.
Setsuko Thurlow, how do you think the war can end? The war in Ukraine can end?
Well, to me personally, why we keep hearing about more military aid and support for war than hearing about the efforts being made for peaceful ceasefire
because there's no attempt to do that. She said, why are we hearing about more aid, more military aid for war, to continue the war, instead of hearing about peace talks and a ceasefire? Because that would defeat the purpose of the profit for the war. There's no profit in peace. That doesn't help the military industrial complex to call for a ceasefire. Doesn't help them at all. There's no money to be made there. That's why you're not hearing about a call for peace. By the time the US government comes around and calls for some type of peace, it's usually years later and after the countries are already devastated. Now they want to come forward and they want to have a call for peace with a country like Syria and say, okay, maybe we should stop doing this. Now they want to come forward and they want to say, okay, yeah, maybe we should call for like a ceasefire in Yemen after so many people have been killed in Yemen. The people are starving. The kids don't have food to eat. We've seen the video footage. Now they want to come forward and call for the peace after they have already devastated and demolished the countries. That's when the US government will come forward and call for peace. After there's nothing left in those countries for the people to go back to. After the people will be poisoned because of the chemicals that have been released into the air from the weapons that are being used. That place will not be safely habitable for those people. And you can't tell me the people living that are still alive in Yemen right now, you can't tell me maybe they're breathing now, but you can't tell me 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later from now, they may not end up with some type of illness just from breathing the air. They'll come forward and ask for peace after they have stripped every single thing they can from you and there is nothing left. Then they'll talk about peace.
Earliest possible time, every day, and many lives are being killed. And certainly something must be going on. Some quietly, some effort must be being paid for ceasefire. But we don't hear about them. Are they really making that effort? Do they?
No, they're not making that effort. I'll answer her question for her. No, they're not making that effort at all.
Really feel they can win this out? I don't know what's their thoughts. All I can say is it has to stop at the earliest possible chance, no matter what.
And finally, President Biden did not apologize for the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And then,
Excuse me, I didn't hear you. What did you
President
say?
Biden did
Excuse me, I
not.
didn't hear you.
President Biden did not apologize for the U.S. dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima.
Of course he didn't.
And 3 days later on Nagasaki. Your thoughts?
Well, it's unfortunate. He had the opportunity, but he didn't. This time, too, in the joint statement or communique, it kept criticizing the Russians, the Chinese, the North Korea. And why do they fail to look at themselves with the critical eyes? And we don't hear anything evil which is being committed by the West. I mean, of course, as far as the war in Ukraine is concerned, I think that Putin should get a total condemnation. I do condemn, no matter what the reason is, to be willing to kill so many human lives. And that's not acceptable. That must stop.
But Russia was calling for peace negotiations earlier on.
Your question was whether the president should have. Well, my opinion is yes. United States had committed the crime against humanity.
The United States has committed crime against humanity. So in reference to the U.S. government making apologies, they're not really known for that. I don't remember them apologizing to Haiti, Somalia, Syria, Yemen. Like they're not really known for that. But one thing that she said that I thought was interesting is she said, it seems like you never hear about crimes of the West being committed. And she's right about that. Now, it's true. Unless you're watching like independent media, for the most part, if you're watching mainstream media, you won't hear about those things at all. You won't hear about the crimes that the West has done unless you study history. And I mean history outside of a standard textbook that's in K through 12 education, because they don't even go that deep into it to really get into the meat about the crimes that the West has committed against people in other countries. And no, it does seem like, for the most part, it seems like the enemy is always someone who is not a part of the West. And that is on purpose. So no, Joe Biden, he did not apologize. You come into the people's home, you come into their country, have the US government doing what they did in reference to the nuclear bomb, no apology. And then you sit down and you meet with Zelensky and talking about, let's give him more money. Let's figure out how we can continue this war in a country where the people were pretty much almost wiped out because of the nuclear bomb. How can you be so tone deaf? It's the optics, people. It really is. We'll finish up her talk here.
The United States have never acknowledged any guilt. And well, this proves old saying, the victors write the history. The U.S. has been condemning Wilson's behavior. But yeah.
Okay, and that's around about the end of it there. But I wanted you to see that because I wanted you guys to see that it's not just about this conference where everyone, all the different leaders from the West, they come together and they sit down and talk about democracy and freedom as it was defined in that first article that I showed you. The main topic of discussion for this particular event was this war with Russia and Ukraine and how they can come together and give Zelensky more money and continue this war. That's what this was about. So people need to see that. And the people there who are protesting, shout out to them because they really need to be getting that message across. Terrible, terrible. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Dave. Check out the book 1984 on Forever War, published in 1949. Of course, some real dark visions of our future there, but others like Black Mirror and Michael Parenti and Richard Wolff have described what 21st century perpetual warfare looks like under Wall Street direction in league with their codes around the world. Well said. And thank you for this tip, Hemp Carr. Fallujah is worse than Hiroshima with their cancer and birth defect rates and prominent medical journal read. Chomsky said this is bigger news than WikiLeaks in a Z magazine interview. A doctor in a piece on Harvard's website said the killing of 250, 500 probably of Iraqi scientists is a sure way to not get testing on depleted uranium. Thank you so much for that, Himkar. I'll have to check out that article there. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me with the algo there. Thank you guys so much. We are moving on to our next story, and we have to go into a little bit of corruption here. Now, we have been revealing, it seems like almost every week, more names that are being released in reference to relationships in some way, shape, or form with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, we know that Bill Gates before was one of those names that was released. He tried to push back on that, tried to say that it wasn't what people thought it was. But there is now new information that will confirm that the relationship that Bill Gates had with Jeffrey Epstein was not just a couple of dinners, so to speak. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to when this information was first revealed that Bill Gates did have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And Bill Gates' defense of that. I told you back then I did not believe him. I thought that he was hiding something. But let's revisit just for shits and giggles. Let's go down that lane.
Of the richest and most powerful men in the world, Bill Gates, who's in town to speak to our politicians and watch the tennis, among other things. And last night he had a rather uncomfortable interview on the ABC.
Now, one of the issues that's dogged you is that of your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Do you regret the relationship that you maintained with him against Melinda's advice and wishes?
Oh, I've said that you're going way back in time. But yeah,
new audience.
I will say for the, over 100th time, yeah, I shouldn't have had dinners with him.
Now, this was something I pointed out before. I want you to pay close attention to his non-verbal behavior. Look at the look on his face. I shouldn't have had dinners with him. He almost looks like, in a way, he's kind of like, yeah, there's more to that story, obviously, right? Look at the look on his face. He's hiding something, right? Notice how he said at the beginning of his statement, he said, well, this is going back many years ago. So what? What? Did you expect her to say you had a relationship with him yesterday? This interview took place a couple of months ago. Jeffrey Epstein was already dead. So for you to come in and say, well, yeah, you're going back way many years ago. So what? Jeffrey Epstein, these crimes that he had been committing against young girls goes back years ago, Bill. So it doesn't matter. Now watch this. He's going to go on.
Epstein had a way of sexually compromising people. Is that what Melinda was warning you about?
No. I mean, no, I had dinner with him and that's all.
I never understood the little bit of laughter there. It almost looked like he just looks very uncomfortable. Look, watch. See, this is something that I pay close attention to, the nonverbal behavior.
Dinner with him and that's all.
Yeah, he's uncomfortable.
And that you regret the relationship, the acquaintance?
That I had dinner with him.
And
okay, this part right here, she asked him, do you regret the relationship and the acquaintance? And he said that I had dinner with him. Even at that point, he was not willing to admit that there was a relationship between him and Jeffrey Epstein. He wanted to try to pass this off as though he just happened to have dinner with this guy, maybe once or twice, but there was no relationship outside of that. I call bull, and I called it back then. And now you're going to see why I was right. You're going to see why I was right. Let's go on.
The relationship between the foundation and Epstein, which
there never was any relationship of any kind.
Hold on to that. So she mentioned the foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation. Okay. He said there was never any relationship in any way of any kind. But then he's going to tell on himself, though. He's going to tell on himself. Let's go on.
That was a good start, Sophie, but I would have liked her to also ask why he began a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after he pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution from a minor.
That part right there. He had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein pled guilty. Pled guilty. We'll get into it. Let's go on.
And was also facing further accusations of sex trafficking children.
Rita, Sarah Ferguson really didn't press him on this issue. And his ex-wife came out, I think it was last year or the year before, and said that he had met with Jeffrey Epstein many times. So he said last night on 7:30 that it was just one dinner and dismissed it pretty quickly. But it seems like there was much more to it because his ex-wife came out and said she was very concerned about their relationship, so much so that she wanted to meet him and went and met with Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, and she also said, because we talked about this as well in that interview that Melinda Gates had with Gayle King, Melinda Gates also said that when she met Jeffrey Epstein, she said he made her feel very uncomfortable. I'll never forget that. She said she felt very uncomfortable and almost in a sense frightened. Why would you feel that way about someone that you just met for the first time? What kind of vibes were they giving you? She said that. And Bill Gates still continued to meet with him. Why would you continue to meet with a man that makes your wife feel that way? She went on to say in the interview she had nightmares about him. Not dreams, nightmares. She was afraid of him. What husband would continue to meet with this man knowing your wife said that's how he made her feel? Unless there was something that Jeffrey Epstein had on him. But they didn't have a relationship, remember?
Well, there's been some reporting on this because of what Melinda Gates has said. New York Times has got plenty on it. But you're right, when he kind of just dismissed it as a dinner or two, that really doesn't give you the full picture, does it, at all?
Okay. Now, that was one interview that he had. There was another interview that he had with, lo and behold, CNN's Anderson Cooper, where he was also asked about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Again, this is going back a couple of months ago. Let's all remember what Bill Gates said.
The New York Times and Wall Street Journal both reported in recent months that Melinda was concerned about a relationship you had with Jeffrey Epstein, who at the time you met him in 2011 had been already convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor. The Times reported she hired divorce attorneys around the time in October 2019 when that contact with Epstein became public. Can you explain your relationship with Epstein? Did you have any concerns? Was there ever any concerns you had about it?
Okay, the key word I want you to, I'll take the captions off because it's up at the top instead of the bottom. The key word I want you to pay attention to here is the word relationship. Now, Anderson Cooper just said the same thing, your relationship with him. Listen to this.
Oh, certainly. You know, I had several dinners with him, you know, hoping that what he said about getting billions of philanthropy for global health.
Pause. Let's go back. Listen to this again. The key word that I want you to pay attention to is relationship.
Can you explain your relationship with Epstein? Did you have any concerns? Was there ever any concerns you had about it?
Oh, certainly.
Oh, certainly. But in the other interview with the young woman, he said he didn't have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now his response is, oh, certainly. Can you explain your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Gates? Oh, certainly. I thought you didn't have a relationship with him. Let's go on. Boy, I tell you.
You know, I had several dinners with him, you know, hoping that what he said about getting billions of philanthropy for global health through contacts that he had might emerge. You know, when it looked like that wasn't a real thing, that relationship ended. But it was a huge mistake to spend time with him, to give him the credibility of, you know, being there. There were lots of others in that same situation, but I made it.
This has nothing to do with the others. You see what he's trying to do here? See, this piece right here. I told you he would tell on himself. This piece right here is very important when he talks about not just agreeing that they had a relationship, but the kind of relationship.
You know, I had several dinners with him, you know, hoping that what he said about getting billions of philanthropy for global health.
Philanthropy for global health. But in the previous interview, when she was asking him about the business, no. There were no relationship, no business. No, we just had dinner.
Through contacts that he had might emerge. You know, when it looked like that wasn't a real thing, that relationship ended. But it was a huge mistake to spend time with him, to give him the credibility of, you know, being there. There were lots of others in that same situation, but I made a mistake.
And in a way, he's kind of telling on other people that were involved as well. You see what he says? Like there were lots of others as well. Why'd you have to say that, Bill? This conversation is about your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
There's been reporting about workplace behavior in the past. The New York Times reported 6 women from Microsoft, the company you created, your foundation, and the financial firm that manages your fortune said that your behavior at times created an uncomfortable workplace environment. I know a spokeswoman for you acknowledged you had an affair 20 years ago with a Microsoft employee that she said ended amicably. Do you have regrets?
Well, certainly I think everyone does, but
So now we get to the point where Anderson Cooper brings up that there were women in the workplace of his company that had issues. They felt uncomfortable. And you have this relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. What is happening here? People see the connection here and people still applaud this man. People still applaud Bill Gates. Give Bill Gates a round of applause for all this philanthropy. The Gates Foundation. Meanwhile, Bill Gates is buying up farmland. So when the next pandemic hits, him and his people will be set. You will be without. They always applaud this man. You got women at Microsoft that didn't feel comfortable. The workplace behavior, the culture, and you hanging out with Epstein.
You know, it's a time of reflection and, at this point, I need to go forward.
This guy he's busted. I'm sorry. I would like to get a behavior analyst to watch these interviews. This guy is busted. It's just the time to go forward. You know, he's only even saying this because he was caught. If he wasn't caught, if he wasn't outed as having some type of relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, that behavior at Microsoft might have continued.
You know, my work is very important to me. Within the family, we'll heal as best we can and learn from what's happened.
Well, just on a personal level, I'm sorry for what you and your family are going through.
Yeah, he had to kiss up at the end in order to keep that gig. Now, that's all in the past. But this so-called relationship that Bill Gates said that he did not have or had or did not have with Jeffrey Epstein, I think it's really important that we bring in this article here from the Wall Street Journal, because this came out recently, and kudos to the Wall Street Journal for reporting this, because this needs to be said. Jeffrey Epstein appeared to threaten Bill Gates over Microsoft co-founder's affair with a Russian bridge player. Now, I'm not here to, push at the man for having an affair on his wife. That's not what this is about. This is about the fact that Bill Gates lied in that interview, and he lied in the previous interview when he tried to downplay the relationship that he had with Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein had blackmail information on you, and that's why you did what you did. It was not just a few dinners. That's how close you were to Jeffrey Epstein, to the point where he could blackmail you. He knew who you were having affairs with. Let's go on. Jeffrey Epstein discovered that Bill Gates had an affair with a Russian bridge player and later appeared to use his knowledge to threaten one of the world's richest men. The Microsoft co-founder met the woman around 2010 when she was in her 20s. Epstein met her in 2013 and later paid for her to attend software coding school. Highlight this. Why was Jeffrey Epstein paying for her school? You mean to tell me just some rich billionaire man is just going to say, hey, nice to meet you, I'll pay for your schooling? To hell no. She was doing something for him or for somebody in his circle. You just don't get free education like that. In 2017, Epstein emailed Gates and asked to be reimbursed for the cost of the course. See this? He emailed Bill Gates and asked to be reimbursed for the cost of the course. Let's go on. The email came after the convicted sex offender had struggled and failed to persuade Gates to participate in a multi-billion-dollar charitable fund that Epstein tried to establish with JP Morgan Chase. The implication behind the message, according to people who have viewed it, was that Epstein could reveal the affair if Gates didn't keep up an association between the two men. Remember when I told you that he was blackmailing people? Mr. Gates met with Epstein solely for philanthropic purposes. Having failed repeatedly to draw Mr. Gates beyond these matters, Epstein tried unsuccessfully to leverage a past relationship to threaten Mr. Gates. Now, that is who's giving this statement? A spokeswoman for Bill Gates. Now, how does she know that he only met with him for philanthropic purposes? She doesn't know. She said what he told her to say, probably. He probably told her, this is the statement that you're going to give them. Let's go on. Epstein was accused of sexually abusing girls as young as 14 and pled guilty in 2008. Yada, yada. You guys know that story. Gates, 67 years old, a tech advisor to Microsoft and one of its largest shareholders, has said he met Epstein a few times only to discuss philanthropy, which he regrets and calls a mistake. Mila Anatova, the Russian bridge player, declined to comment on Gates and said she didn't know who Epstein was when they met. I had no idea that he was a criminal or had an ulterior motive. I just thought he was a successful businessman and wanted help. I am disgusted with Epstein and what he did. Let me get this straight, people. Gentleman just comes up to you, meets you, and just offers to pay for your schooling. Does this not send off alarms to you guys? Let's go on. The new details about Epstein and Gates reveal a layer of complexity to their relationship and shed new light on how Epstein operated. In the years between his 2008 conviction and death, Epstein packed his days meeting with politicians, businessmen, academics. We know we talked about the story about him and Noam Chomsky, and celebrities. He provided favors and sought to use the connections for his own purposes. And when the relationship soured, he could turn against people. But in order to turn against those people, you have to have information against them. You have to have information that would either ruin their reputation or their business or their image. Let's go on. Gates with a net worth Gates with a net worth in excess of $100 billion and one of the world's biggest philanthropists was among the most well-known names in Epstein's calendar. Starting in 2011, Gates had more than half a dozen meetings scheduled with Epstein. More than half a dozen meetings scheduled with Epstein. I went to dinner with them once or twice, including dinners at Epstein's New York townhouse. Documents show this. Gates flew on Epstein's private plane from New Jersey to Florida in March 2013, according to flight records. That same month, the two men met in France with an official on the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. They spent much of a day together in New York City in September 2014, meeting other billionaires, the Journal reported. Bridge lessons. Gates had learned how to play bridge from his parents, and the card game became one of his favorite hobbies. Gates played with Anatova, another devotee of the game. She attended a university in Russia between 2000 and 2005, according to her LinkedIn profile. She later founded a bridge club in the US before taking on several roles as a software engineer in the Bay Area, her LinkedIn profile shows. In a video posted online in 2010, Anatova talked about meeting Gates at a bridge tournament and playing against the Microsoft co-founder. I didn't beat him, but I tried to kick him with my leg, she said in the video. So here's the picture here. Here's her. And here's the picture of her with Bill Gates. That's right, Kaladen. This is just one girl who knows how many more there are. Exactly. And that's the point I was going to get to as well. This is just the one we know about. And I think it's somewhat convenient. Oh, they said she was in college. Okay, convenient to release her name because she wasn't a minor. But how do we know that this was the only girl? And how do we know that there weren't other girls that were younger? You can't fool me with this. You can't sit here and tell me that Bill Gates was this afraid that Jeffrey Epstein was going to say, I'm going to tell people that you're having an affair with this bridge player who's a college student. Okay. Why would this be of a surprise? A lot of rich men, billionaires flying across the world. They have private jets. You mean to tell me this would come as a shock or a surprise to Melinda or any other woman that's married to these men? That's like sitting there telling someone whose boyfriend or husband is a professional basketball player, football player, baseball player. Oh, yeah, I think he may have had an affair. Duh. So what? You mean to tell me these men aren't greedy with groupies? You mean to tell me these billionaire men don't fly on private jets and go to strip clubs and shit? I don't buy that one bit. Don't buy it. I've been in strip clubs. I wasn't a dancer, but I've been in strip clubs. I've been in cheap strip clubs and I've been in fancy strip clubs. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you this. There are a lot of men that come into those clubs that have money, like Bill Gates, and they don't sit in the crowd with everybody else. They get the private rooms. So I'm supposed to believe that he was this afraid. Oh my God, he might tell my wife that I had an affair. Give me a break. However, he would be really afraid if Epstein were to tell his wife that he had an affair with maybe a female that was not of age. I don't believe that this is the only one. I don't buy it. Let's go on. Anatova had an idea to start an online business to teach people how to play bridge, and she sought funds for it, according to documents. And then it goes on to say that Boris, a Gates confidant and top science advisor at the time, who also knew Epstein, introduced Anatova to Epstein to help her raise the funds. You see how this is all? No, they're just doing all this because they want to be nice. Give me a break. Give me a break. Come on. These grown ass men helping out this young girl just because they want to be nice. No, they want something in return. Nikolic said when he first met Epstein, it was in the capacity as Gates' scientific advisor, and they discussed philanthropic proposals. I deeply regret that I ever met Epstein. His crimes were despicable. I never saw anything like his illegal behavior. My heart goes out to his victims and their families. You know, everybody says this. Everybody says they never saw anything. They never saw the behavior. They never saw it. Somebody saw it, damn it. Somebody saw it. Let's go on. Anatova and Nikolic met at Epstein's townhouse in November 2013, where she presented her proposal to Epstein, who provided feedback. Documents show she was looking to raise $500,000 for the venture, which she called Bridge Planet. Its mission was to promote bridge by creating quality tutorials for beginners and advanced players. She wrote an email to Epstein for the meeting and reviewing the proposal. Epstein ultimately didn't invest in the project. The next year, Anatova briefly stayed in an apartment in New York City provided by Epstein. This guy was just providing apartments. I didn't interact with him or with anyone else while there. So there's Bill Gates and there's Nikolic there. She failed to secure the funding. Anatova said she decided to become a software programmer and asked several people to lend her money for a programming boot camp. Epstein agreed to pay, and he paid directly to the school. Nothing was exchanged. I don't know why he did that. When I asked, he said something like he was wealthy and wanted to help people when he could. Come on, man. Come on. So it goes on here. They go into the JP Morgan connection, which we have talked about JP Morgan and Epstein's connection on here multiple times. So I want to come down to this part. It says Epstein proposed that JP Morgan set up the fund with a minimum of 100 million contribution per individual and pay him millions of dollars in fees. In addition to the fees, the disgraced financier saw the fund as a way to rehabilitate his reputation. It hinged on securing support from Gates, the documents show. So this is how he was able to come at Bill Gates. In essence, this fund will allow Bill to have access to higher quality people, investment allocation, governance without upsetting either his marriage or the sensitivities of the current foundation employees. Epstein wrote on August 16th, 2011 to two top JP Morgan executives, Jas Staley and Mary Erdos. The next day, Epstein wrote, Bill is terribly frustrated. He would like to boost some of the things that are working without taking away from those that are not. So, and you can read, I'm not going to read the entire article because it is really long, but this piece, not relationship troubles, hold on. This part right here. In 2017, Epstein contacted Gates about the Russian bridge player years after the relationship had ended, according to people familiar with the matter. He sent an email to Gates asking to be reimbursed for the cost of Anatova's coding school. The sum was immaterial for the two men, and the tone of the message was that Epstein knew about the affair and could expose it. The spokeswoman for Gates said he didn't make a payment. Mr. Gates had no financial dealings with Epstein. Days before he died in 2019, Epstein changed his will and named Nikolic as a backup executor. Nikolic said Epstein didn't discuss the idea with him beforehand and that he subsequently declined to serve. He could have listed Bill because that would have been, couldn't have listed Bill because that would have been too obvious. So he chose me. I have come to believe it was likely a retaliatory move against Bill Gates. So, like I said before, Epstein was blackmailing people and Bill Gates lied. Now, I said that back then months ago. I said this guy's lying. He's hiding something. But now where does RFK Jr. come in with all this? Because now there's this came my way, and this is not a recent article, but it was sent to me. And so I had to look into this as well. There apparently was some type of a connection between Jeffrey Epstein and RFK Jr. Like, it's just, who did this guy not know? Now, it was Newsweek that had reported this. I want to go into this article a little bit. Then I want to share some information from Whitney Webb herself that I think you need to hear. Let's get into this article first. Now, this was 2021. I never saw this, but it has resurfaced, right? Because RFK Jr. is running for president. Who flew on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express plane? Full list of people named. So we knew about Bill Clinton, yada, yada, yada. But the part that I want to show you, we knew about Prince Andrew. We talked about that. Were the other names. And this was the part that I was kind of like, say what now? Who flew on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express plane? Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, comedian actor, for those who are not aware. That one was a shocker too. Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, and this is the one that I think threw people for a loop, which was Robert F. Kennedy Jr., violinist Perlman, U.S. Senator John Glenn, former Senator Majority Leader George Mitchell. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr., so again, because he is running for president, this article is resurfacing again. And someone sent it to me and I was like, say what now? So I did a little bit of digging, because first we want to say, just because he flew on the plane doesn't mean he was involved in any of those activities that happened there. Doesn't mean he even knew about it. We don't know. So I did a little bit of digging, and to my surprise, RFK Jr. actually interviewed Whitney Webb, who wrote the book, of course, about Jeffrey Epstein and his connections, on his podcast about Bill Gates and Epstein. And so I said to myself, well, if he interviewed her about this, if he had any wrongdoing, Whitney Webb would have known and she would have put it in the book, right? Listen to this just a little bit. This is from his podcast, Epstein and Bill Gates with Whitney Webb. Let's dive in. Gonna take it back a little bit so you can hear. Okay.
Hi, everybody. If you don't know who Whitney Webb is, or if you don't read her stuff, then you're missing probably the best investigative reporter in America today. And I really want to talk to you about the passports and also about Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein. I know you're doing a book about that right now, about their odd, strange bedfellows. But I will say this, that I don't know how you do it, Whitney, how you do your research, but you are more dialed in than anybody that I know and understand kind of the gravity of what's happening and all.
By the way, this interview took place May 22nd, 2021.
The characters are, and the role not only of the pharmaceutical industry, but the banks, the financial industry, the intelligence agencies, and others in, I guess, what people would now call the Great Reset, the imposition, this use, this leveraging that we're seeing of the pandemic to impose these totalitarian controls and these huge cultural and value shifts and structural shifts in American democracy. Whitney writes for her own website, which is called Unlimited Hangouts, and she also writes often for The Defender. Thank you for doing that, and also for The Last American Vagabond. But her stories are the kind of stories that I just wait, to come out, and I'm very excited when I see anything new that you've written. Let's talk about Bill Gates and his friend, Jeffrey Epstein. And wait, was that really a friendship? What was going on there?
Well, it's hard to just describe exactly the nature of the relationship in that sense, because a lot of the way the people around Epstein were, it's hard to really call them friends, because a lot of the way that network operates is through blackmail, even on people that are technically on their side. So it's a very dog-eat-dog world, I guess you could say. So friends may sort of be a loose term in the way that, regular people understand it. When you're talking about this type of, ruling elite, they have a very different mentality and a very different approach to friendship maybe than the average person would. But what's particularly notable about the Bill Gates-Jeffrey Epstein relationship is that even now that it's being talked about in mainstream circles in connection with the Gates' divorce, the mainstream media continues to assert that they did not meet until 2011. There is a mountain of evidence, in my opinion, that suggests that this is categorically false and that they actually knew each other back in the 1990s. I first stumbled upon this in
That's an important piece I think people need to hear, that Whitney said that Bill Gates and Epstein actually knew each other back in the 1990s. I wanted you to hear that piece. Again, this is on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s podcast called RFK Jr. Podcast, The Defender Podcast, Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates with Whitney Webb. This was May 22nd of 2021.
2019, when I was doing an investigative series on the Epstein scandal, there was a scrubbed article from January 22nd, 2001 that had originally been published in the Evening Standard, a well-respected UK newspaper, talking about Prince Andrew and his relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And the part on Jeffrey Epstein and the reason it was scrubbed, it appears to have been scrubbed during the period of his first arrest between 2006 and 2007, is because it mentions the fact that Jeffrey Epstein at some point before the publication of that article had openly claimed to have been working in collaboration with the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. So, of course, the revelations that later came to light about Epstein, obviously the powers that be, the national security state, didn't want to have any obvious ties hanging around there. So that article ended up disappearing. But what was also notable about that article and what stuck out to me is that, since this was published in 2001, there's a line in there talking about Epstein, saying that Epstein was a billionaire hedge fund manager, which was sort of or property developer, which was sort of the theme at the time in articles about Epstein. But it says that Epstein made his millions through his business links with three individuals: Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, and Bill Gates being.
I'm not going to play the entire conversation. It's a longer conversation. Eric, you can put the link to that podcast in the chat if you want, so people can follow that. But the reason why I wanted you to hear that is, number one, she debunks the lie that Bill Gates had about, oh, I met him in such and such. No, according to Whitney, Whitney's done a lot of research about this. They knew each other going all the way back to the 1990s. So like I told you that Bill Gates was lying when I covered that months ago, I was right. Bill Gates was lying. Two, this brought up a different question. If RFK Jr. was complicit in some way, shape, or form, why would he have this podcast and have Whitney Webb come on? And she's been on his podcast more than once, by the way, to talk about this particular discussion if he was guilty. That's something I want you to ask yourself, that question. And then I want to go into this statement here. Now, this is from the book in reference to RFK Jr. I'm going to try to put this up here as best as I can. Okay, yeah, you guys can still read it. In an interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for this book, he stated that Ghislaine Maxwell's entry into his family's social network in the early 1990s was likely through his former wife, Mary Richardson. Per Kennedy, Richardson seemed to have known Maxwell through Richardson's former boyfriend, Carlos Mavrillon. There is considerable supporting evidence for this claim. RFK Jr. also stated that the two occasions he was on Epstein's plane had been arranged between Ghislaine Maxwell and Mary Richardson. So I'll come back into this and just say, so that explains how he ended up on the plane. Let's go on. The Lolita Express. Where are we here? Right here. In one instance, the flight was part of a pre-planned fossil hunting trip to South Dakota, which he believed had been Ghislaine's idea, as Epstein had appeared to only have attended grudgingly. On that trip, Kennedy remembered that Epstein did not mingle with us and hardly spoke and did not participate in the fossil hunt. The other flight came about after Richardson accepted an offer from Ghislaine to fly Richardson and her family from New York to Palm Beach in order to visit Ethel Kennedy, his mother. Kennedy said he and Mary were accompanied by Kennedy's two older children on that flight. So the second flight, they're saying here that his children were with him. So it wasn't just him and his wife, his previous wife, by the way. I want to be clear here. I don't want people to think this is Cheryl. That's with his previous wife. Okay. Let's go back in here. On one of the flights, the return trip to New York from South Dakota, Epstein clearly had a problem with Kennedy's rambunctious children, and halfway back to New York, he, Epstein, ordered the pilot to put down at Midway Field in Chicago. He got off the plane and made his own way home. A blonde was waiting for him at Plainside in Chicago. That's Epstein. Kennedy remembered that Ghislaine was in silent tears after Epstein's abrupt departure. So for the questions that people had in reference to the list that was in the Newsweek article about RFK Jr.'s participation on those flights, this is what is said about his participation on the flights. And it sounds like the coordination happened between his former wife and Ghislaine Maxwell, not so much himself and Jeffrey Epstein. And it sounds like from this statement here, there actually wasn't that much activity or communication between Epstein and the rest of the family. So just wanted to explain that, because I know people have reached out to me and they said, did you see that what happened with RFK Jr. and Epstein? And look, we got to talk about it. No favorite here. No favorites. We have to talk about it. But this is the information that I have found so far. If someone sends me something else, I can talk about that as well. But what I've found so far is this information. So again, we don't know if he knew about what was going on there. Apparently, based on what I found, it seems like he does not. Why would he have Whitney Webb on the podcast to talk about Epstein? And I'm pretty sure Whitney Webb in her research would have found more information than what was just mentioned about those 2 flights on that plane. Whitney Webb has no problem revealing who has been involved. So that's where we are with that. Just wanted to make sure I did cover that, because that did come my way. But as I said, you guys, as time goes on, more and more names are going to be revealed. It's only a matter of time. Do I think we'll get everyone's name? No, I don't. But I really do think Whitney Webb is the go-to on this particular topic, because she has done extensive research. Just letting you know. But did want to make sure I addressed that. Case in point, though, Bill Gates lied. Case in point. Go ahead and hit that like button, guys, if you haven't had a chance to do so. That helps me with the algo. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to go to some of the comments and then we'll get to the next story here. Thank you for the super chat, Mary. Ha! He is working hard to carefully choose his words. Such a creep. Mika says Epstein was connected with some of the most notorious people in the world. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. I wasn't a dancer. Stop making me think of jokes. I wasn't a dancer. I've been to strip clubs before. And let me explain. The reason why we would go to strip clubs is because, after the regular club would close, especially this was when I was in college and I was my early 20s. The regular club would, last call was 1 a.m. and I was young and you still want to go out and stuff. Well, the strip clubs were still open. So we go to the strip club. Yeah, Roger. Thanks for the super chat, Justin. Who will win if the nominees are Trump and Biden again? Answer: the ruling class. The rest of us lose. That's a good point, Justin. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Chris got pulled in by his friend Bill Clinton. CR says, I heard RFK Jr. got kicked off Epstein's plane for some reason. Kim says, I find it very odd that Whitney left RFK Jr. out. Well, now you know more info about that. We are going into this next story here about Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Tim Scott. It's just a mixture of sorts. And I don't know if you've seen this poll, but if I were a part of the Biden administration, I would be very concerned if I saw these numbers. This came through from The Hill, which states that Donald Trump is now 7 points ahead of Joe Biden. Not even exaggerating. Make it a little bigger. Yay. Former President Trump leads President Biden by 7-point margin in a new survey shared Friday with The Hill from the Harvard Capps Harris poll. Separately, the poll found that Biden and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis are deadlocked in a tie when those surveyed were asked who they prefer in a head-to-head matchup. Now, I want to come in here and say this. I told you the DNC is not going to allow, Marianne Williamson is not going to allow Marianne Williamson or RFK Jr. to win. But that doesn't mean that they can't still in some way hurt Joe Biden in the general. Right now, RFK Jr., I saw a poll recently. They had him at 20. I think he's 20%. There's another poll that has RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson both tied at 11%. There's multiple polls, but in most of the polls that I've seen, RFK Jr. has the most support between him and Marianne. And I said, even if the DNC, which they will not give the nomination to RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr., and I point to him more so because he seems to be more the leading more here. RFK Jr. can still hurt Joe Biden in the general because some of the people who want him and do not want Joe Biden, some of those people may decide to vote for Trump. Now, this is something similar that we saw with Bernie Sanders in 2016. It wasn't a lot of people that went this way, but there were some supporters that said when it was between Hillary and Bernie, they were like, I'm all in for Bernie. And then when Bernie lost or they cheated Bernie, they said, fuck it, I'm voting for Donald Trump. That did happen. I know people who did that. So this could still hurt Joe Biden. So for Joe Biden to sit here and to ignore the fact that he does have primary challengers and doesn't want to have a debate, that is not going to help him in the way that I think that he thinks that it would. So Trump is leading by 7 points. The results coupled together point to an apparent strength of Trump in the GOP primary as DeSantis gets set to enter the race as early as next week. Trump had led DeSantis in a number of polls of GOP voters by double digits. DeSantis, by the way, is expected to announce his candidacy tomorrow, apparently on Twitter through a Twitter space with Elon Musk. So I guess it's a good thing I don't stream on Wednesday nights, but is supposed to happen tomorrow. I saw the announcement on Twitter from Elon Musk. I don't know why DeSantis is entering this race. I don't know why Tim Scott is entering this race. I'm going to be very clear. I'm going to have some things to say about Tim Scott. We're going to get to him in just a second because I got some things to say. But I will say this. The polls show that the majority of Republican voters want Donald Trump instead of Ron DeSantis. So I don't know what Ron DeSantis is really trying to do. But remember what Tucker Carlson said in reference to the media, that Fox News, Rupert Murdoch said, we're going to be going for DeSantis this time around. So maybe Ron DeSantis believes that because he has the donors and he's going to have the media, Fox News media on his side, maybe he will have a chance after all. Let's go on. The survey found 47% of respondents said they would vote for Trump if the 2024 election was today, and Trump and Biden were the political parties' respective candidates. 47% backed Biden, while 13% said they did not know or were unsure. 42% of respondents picked Biden, and an equal percentage picked DeSantis in that matchup. If you're the sitting incumbent, how do you tie with Ron DeSantis? You're the incumbent president. This is how bad Joe Biden is. This does not happen. When have you seen this happen? Boy, I tell you. Hypothetical 2024 matchup between Trump and Biden. Here we go. You see this? There it is. 40% Biden, 47% Trump. You can't make this up. If Joe Biden's sitting back thinking that he has this in the bag, he is sadly mistaken. And now, Tim Scott, who's a Republican representative, now he has decided to throw his hat in the ring. Now, I went to college in South Carolina. Tim Scott is not appealing, in my opinion. I don't think he's exciting. He gives me Jeb Bush vibes. He's kind of boring, but you can see so for yourself. Here's his announcement, and I don't know where he thinks he's going to get in this race, but here we go.
We cannot have innocent people at risk, police officers getting ambushed and attacked, and seniors locked in their homes from the time the sun goes down until the sun comes up.
First mistake he makes is he assumes that the police officers are innocent people. First mistakes he makes. And he's wishy-washy, like when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, at one point he said he's been stopped by police for driving while black. And then at another point he said, like, well, you just got to follow the law and you won't get stopped. He's all over the place. All over the place. All these people were totally on board with someone like a Donald Trump when Donald Trump was the president, including Tim Scott. Now Tim Scott wants to jump in and run against Donald Trump. Tim Scott know damn well he does not have any chance running against Donald Trump. He knows that. You mean to tell you guys really think that he could win? Some people don't even know who he is. Like, come on. Jeb Bush vibes. Low energy.
Joe Biden and the radical left are attacking every single rung of the ladder that helped me climb. And that's why I'm announcing today.
Before he gets to that, I want you to hear what he just said. I think this is important because he makes it about himself. Listen to this.
Every single rung of the ladder that helped me climb.
Oh, sorry. Let me go back a little bit more.
Left are attacking every single rung of the ladder that helped me climb.
It's all about what helped him. Joe Biden and the radical left, they kill me how they make it seem like, they try to make it seem like Joe Biden is radical. Joe Biden is not radical. Joe Biden is basically Republican light. He's not a communist. He's not a socialist. He's not a progressive. Stop giving him credit where it's not deserved. Okay? Stop it. Stop it. I wish Joe Biden was a radical. He's not. But you notice what Tim Scott said there? He said they are basically breaking apart every piece of the ladder that helped me. Me. It's all about what helped me. Not about what helps and uplifts the people. It's about what helped him. This is another vanity project.
And that's why I'm announcing today that I'm running for president of the United States of America. Thank you.
Tim Scott reminds me, first of all, I don't even believe these people are real. This is North Charleston, South Carolina. I wonder if they pay these people to stand behind him. You know, they position certain people behind them, right? They position certain people behind them on purpose, right? That's where the cameras are going to be. Tim Scott reminds me of one of those dudes at the party that's like, you ever go to a party and then there's people who are there who are just like the life of the party. They're more social people, that kind of thing. And then there's the one dude that kind of stands off in the corner and you could tell he's not really social, but he's there because his roommate probably drug him out and said, come to this party with me. I don't want to go alone. So he goes there, doesn't really want to chat with people, kind of stares off in the corner. But after he gets a couple of drinks in him, he's like, yeah, people clap. Yeah, I'm going to run for president of the United States. That's what he reminds me of. He's the guy in the corner at the party. Get him a couple of drinks, get him a couple of shots, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Yeah, clap. And then tomorrow, people forget his name. Everyone just goes back to class. And he'll come up to them in class and say, man, that party was awesome last night. They're like, who? Who are you? Get off of me. Who are you?
Thank you. You see, they're attacking our American values, our schools, our economy, and our security. But not on my watch. Not on my watch. That won't work. I cannot stand by while this is done to America. She's done too much for me.
Here we go with the me again. It's all about what has worked for Tim. What has helped Tim in his life? You cannot believe this.
Our nation, our values, and our people are strong, but our president is weak.
Well, he's right about the president being weak part, but he's not strong either. That's what's hilarious to me. I'm like, do you really think that guy would win? You really think Tim Scott would win? Give me a break. Give me a break. Oh, dear God. So Where is the Biden campaign heading in all of this? You got Trump leading 7 points in the poll. You got Tim Scott jumping into the race. Nikki Haley had already announced. And tomorrow, Ron DeSantis is expected to announce that he is jumping into this race as well. Well, one of the things that they're doing now are the ad campaigns, and they're targeting certain states. And I want you to pay attention to the states that they're targeting. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. I think this is important for you guys to see.
The president's campaign just released its first strategy memo, and it is quite revealing where the ad buys are. It's boasting a number of viable pathways to 270 electoral votes. Team Biden's dropping a seven-figure early ad buy in blue wall swing states, including Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. You can see the other early ad buy states in here: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida among them. That campaign is highlighting Wisconsin, where abortion rights just swung the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court left. Democrats think that's a sign that the social and culture issues will help Biden in some of these perennial swing states.
That part right there. If you look at some of the states, Florida, Wisconsin, Georgia, these are states that have already been hit by stricter abortion laws. But notice what she said. They're trying to tap into the social and the cultural issues in order to help Joe Biden win, because they can't do it on his record and his performance. That's sad. That's sad. So you tap into those states where abortion rights have been restricted, and then what? Are you going to promise to codify Roe v. Wade? Didn't he say he couldn't do that? After they promised to do that when people came out for the midterms, then after the midterms, he's like, yep, we're not going to be able to do that. Well, what are you going to promise to those people? This is what they're running on, the social and the cultural issues. This is how they get people every time.
Count more than the economy. But finally, one editorial in the New York Post pointing out Biden is a fool to ignore RFK Jr. At least 3 different polls have him up around 20%, John. And obviously that is not to be ignored this far out still from the presidential election.
Well, yeah, that's true. But, you know, as we pointed out in one of our panels, Biden still got 62%, which ain't half bad.
This is true.
If you're running for the nomination. But a lot to chew over between now and next January, and then from January on through the primary season, and then into November. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Now, I don't know. It might be fun for you guys. It won't be fun for me. Hold on to that 62% because I believe that's going to change. I don't think it's going to stay that way. And you have to hear another way that the media is trying to run cover for Joe Biden's, I don't want to even say his age, but his cognitive decline. And they won't use those words. They're using the word age, because then it makes you feel bad if you say he's too old, like that kind of thing, right? So I want you to listen to what they said here on MSNBC. Now, this guy, he is just basically a puppet for the New York Times. Now, this is, you see the Mehdi Hassan show in the background, but he works at the New York Times. Listen to what he's going to say about the people that have criticism about Joe Biden's age. Listen to this.
As we start the second hour, we want to flip the script on how President Biden's re-election campaign is perceived. The common wisdom in much of the news media is that Biden might struggle, maybe definitely is struggling with parts of the electorate in 2024 because of how voters view his age. But in a recent piece in the New York Times, I argue there's a chicken and egg aspect to this coverage. Now, let me say up front that a candidate's age and competency are always fair game in politics. Even Biden conceded earlier this month that he took a hard look at his age as he contemplated whether to seek re-election.
One of the things that people are going to find out, they're going to see a race, and they're going to judge whether or not I have it or don't have it. I respect them taking a hard look at it. I take a hard look at it as well. I took a hard look at it before I decided to run. And I feel good. I feel excited about the prospects.
But there are other truths that must be considered. As I wrote in the Times, headlines and polls don't just measure and reflect public sentiment, they also influence public sentiment. The persistence of a theme elevates and validates that theme. It's true that if he's reelected, Biden would be the oldest president we've ever had. But he is already the oldest president we've already had the first time he was elected. So what has changed? I'd argue that the biggest change wasn't the simple passage of time, but the decision of some Republican leaders to focus like a laser on Biden's age as the factor weighing against him, and then how the media responded to that heightened focus.
BS. What changed was that people saw how Joe Biden was performing publicly at press conferences, during interviews, listening to Joe Biden stumble over words, call people incorrect names, go to shake the hand of someone as the prime minister who is not the prime minister of that country. That's what changed. It doesn't even matter if Republicans were trying to use that smear. It was Joe Biden's behavior and his actions that changed the game for people. It's interesting how people like him can come to the defense of Joe Biden's age. But when Bernie Sanders was running in 2020, MSNBC, CNN were trying to say, oh, Bernie may be too old. They couldn't make those excuses for Bernie Sanders when he was trying to run. But as I'm sitting up here calling this out, Bernie Sanders should have called this shit out. That's right. I'm saying it. As I'm sitting up here telling you how they sit up here and make excuses for Joe Biden's age because he supports the status quo. He supports the military industrial complex. He doesn't want to give you Medicare for all. He backs the establishment. And they would not do this same defense for Bernie Sanders. In fact, they used his age as a weapon against him. As I'm sitting here telling you this, Bernie Sanders should be sitting up here telling you this exact same thing.
Editorial decisions can be influenced by campaigns, and coverage can influence voters as much as inform those voters. From my piece in the Times, the idea that voters are worried about Biden's age and capacity has been repeated so often that it no longer requires any proof beyond polling that reflects what respondents have consumed. Reports that they're worried about Biden's age and capacity.
Again, it goes back to Biden's behavior. Not your whack article in the New York Times, not the data that's been presented by other people as well. It is strictly his behavior. It's the way he has performed.
Breathless headlines have created a sense that worry about the president's age is common and common sense, when in fact, at least in part, it is fueled by political manipulation and by media complicity. So as the 2024 election cycle begins in earnest, maybe we, in the news media, should let the voters decide what's most important to them and stop deciding for the voters.
But then you wouldn't be mainstream media if you did that. See, that's the thing. We need to stop deciding for the voters. That's what he just said, right? He's mainstream media, but that's what you do. Your job is to control the narrative. Your job is to make that decision for the voters, because mainstream media doesn't even believe that we can make our own informed decisions. Mainstream media doesn't believe that. That's why they got to smear people who run on progressive issues. That's why they got to smear people anyone who's looking to run third or independent party. That's why they have to smear those people, because they don't believe that we can make our own decisions for ourselves. And that is a problem. So miss me with all of that, because here you come years later, many elections later, and now you say, well, maybe mainstream media, we shouldn't be doing this. Get out of here. Get out of here. After you've sat up there all these years, when we could have had decent people in some of these positions, not just the presidency, but in some of these positions in general, and your network, MSNBC, CNN, all you guys sat up there and you smeared those people. Get out of here. Now, there's another clip that I want to show you with that same gentleman, where they're actually talking about the idea of a third party, the fact that a third party could take away from the votes from the Democratic Party. Now, there's this idea, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there are talks of getting Joe Manchin to run sort of as like a third party spoiler or a sense or whatever, like Joe Manchin, right? They're trying to get him to run as more of the centrist figure in the race. The same guy, shout out to Case Study QB, listen to what they say about third party.
Brad, the New York Times reports that the centrist group No Labels is considering recruiting a third-party candidate in 2024, even discussing names like Joe Manchin.
That's the name of the group there. It's called No Labels, eyes a third-party run in 2024. What they're basically looking to do is to just stop and prevent another Trump win at all costs. And so the people that are part of that organization, they have found a way to come together in reference to let's just defeat Trump. Don't worry about the issues. You ain't got to really run on any type of policies. The goal we're all coming together for is to just defeat Trump. And there are talks of trying to get Joe Manchin to run in that spot.
The report says that Democrats are especially alarmed by the development. Do you think a third-party candidate in 2004 would do something like Jill Stein and Gary Johnson did in 2016 and like siphon votes away from the Democratic candidate?
That's a damn lie. So he's bringing up Jill Stein and Gary Johnson. I told you, this guy is just a puppet for the New York Times. He's just spewing propaganda. Jill Stein didn't take votes away from Hillary Clinton. I want to be very clear. The people who voted for Hillary Clinton wanted to vote for Hillary Clinton. Jill Stein did not. Gary Johnson, same thing. They did not pull votes away from these people. I've had this very conversation with Jill Stein. And even if you do the math, and we've talked about this, even if you give all of Jill Stein's votes to Hillary Clinton still loses because she doesn't win the Electoral College. But here they go, these talking points. Like, this guy is a paid liar. Paid liar.
No. I mean, go for it. God bless No Labels. If they want to try for it, go for it. I think that, again, we know what's at stake. We know that Trump and DeSantis and all these guys, to Paula's point, they're inflaming and using wedge issues to ginny up their base. They're not even trying to persuade independent voters. The reason why Joe Biden won is because he is the best candidate. Still today, this is the reason why he is our candidate.
Wrong. Joe Biden did not win because he was the best candidate. Joe Biden won because Obama convinced other people to drop out of the race, and because Elizabeth Warren, the snake, decided to stay in the race for Super Tuesday, knowing damn well she had no chance of winning at that point in time. Bernie Sanders just wrote about this in his most recent book, by the way. That's why Joe Biden won. Paid liars, paid propagandists. You mean to tell me how you go from Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada? He didn't win any of those states. Then all of a sudden he wins South Carolina. That's it. That's it. He's the best candidate. He was not the best candidate. He won because he was selected to win. And that's how it works. Obama pick up the phone, make a couple calls, tell people to drop out, making moves behind the scenes. There is no democracy. Another paid propagandist.
To actually reach voters across the aisle. Trump, DeSantis, all these guys are at 37%. That's going to be their number. The question is whether Joe Biden, the largest electorate in every election cycle, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's people that don't vote. And that's the percentage of the electorate that I am most worried about, right? In the Obama White House, in the lead up to the midterms and the re-election, we did something special. We created something called the American Jobs Act. Why did we do that? To Paola's point, because we had to paint a vision in the second term. Obama's second term, the bear is loose. Second term Obama, we had to start painting a vision of here are the things that we're going to do in this second term. That is what the Joe Biden White House and this Joe Biden campaign is going to need to start to do. But he's the best messenger. I mean, it's not even a question. I mean, look, polling right now is very early, but there is not a single person in America right now, he's our sitting president, that has a chance to beat, I mean, there's no other way to put it. This is a fascist takeover of the Republic.
Is he correct? I just showed you. He said there's not a sitting American that has a chance to beat Joe Biden. I just told you the poll that shows that Donald Trump is 7 points ahead of Joe Biden.
Republican Party. This is not your mom and dad's or your grandparents' Republican Party. This is a fight for the very soul, not to sound like Joe Biden, but for the very soul of our democracy. And
what soul and what democracy? You see, he's from the Obama administration. You see, they all just repeat the same talking points. He don't even know what he's talking about. I'm not going to repeat Joe Biden, but we got to fight for the soul of our democracy. What does that mean? Has anybody asked that question? Like when Joe Biden said that, the soul of our, what do you mean by that? If I was interviewing that gentleman, I would have asked him, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by the soul of our democracy? Could you explain that a little bit? Go a little bit deeper? Wouldn't explain it. Don't even know what it means. They're just all repeating the same talking points. Propaganda 101, repeat the same message by as many people as possible.
The only person that's going to win is someone who is, one, in office as we speak, and two, can reach communities in, as Paula said, in every single state. And it's not just white suburban, ex-urban moms. We're talking about Asian American voters in Nevada. We're talking about Latino voters in Florida and in Texas and in Georgia. And Joe Biden, during that...
Who did he leave out? You guys pay attention to this. By the way, pay close attention to who he leaves out, right? Look at this. See, they give their self away. They make my job easy. Look.
Every single state. And it's not just white suburban, ex-urban moms.
It's not just white suburban, ex-urban moms. Why does he say that? Because that is the demographic that Joe Biden won in states like Georgia that helped him win. But listen who he leaves out. Listen to this.
We're talking about Asian American voters in Nevada. We're talking
Asian American voters in Nevada.
About Latino voters in Florida. And in
Latino voters in Florida. Which Latino voters, by the way? Because, you know, Democrats, they tend to just group Latinos as like one group, you know, oh, we got to get the Latinos. Which Latinos are you referring to? Are you referring to Cuban Americans? Puerto Rican Americans? Mexican Americans? Which group are you referring to? You see how they just lump them all together and think they all feel the same politically? Okay. So he said Asian Americans, not just talking about white suburban moms, Asian voters in Nevada, Latinos in Florida,
Texas and in Georgia. And Joe Biden, during that
in Texas and in Georgia. Okay. Who did he leave out, guys? Who he leave out? He didn't say anything about people who are working class, and he didn't even mention African American voters. And you know damn well the Democratic Party, as a Democrat candidate, you can't win without the African American vote. He didn't even mention us. He didn't mention me. What the hell is that? When I tell you to leave the Democratic Party, I'm not telling you to go to the Republican Party. I'm telling you leave the whole damn system altogether. They're not giving you anything. He don't even remember you. He didn't remember you. Killian Gorg is right. Black folks. Say what now? You can't even win without us. He ain't thinking about us, though. And you got the black host right there. Okay.
Democratic primary, who was the candidate that could galvanize communities of color and young people to vote for him? It was Joe Biden. It was.
Notice how he says, who was the candidate that can galvanize communities of color to come out and vote? It's communities of color. He says that so he don't have to mention black people. You see how this works? Boy, I tell you.
It wasn't Cory Booker. It wasn't Kamala Harris. It wasn't Mayor Pete. It was our guy, Joe Biden. So look, I will say this. For the people that are saying he's too old, he's this, he's that, and he's the other, I'll point you to Bernie Sanders and how he ignited young people. And I'll point you to Dark Brandon 2.0. Because young people...
Bernie Sanders is not experiencing cognitive decline. Bernie Sanders remembers people's names.
Don't care about your age. Young people care about the issues that you're fighting for. And that's where we're going to win.
They're doing that on purpose, using age instead of saying what I told you, cognitive decline. But I think there's other issues as well. There is this issue also with New Hampshire. Now, remember, they changed the schedule in reference to the primary voting states. South Carolina is going to be first instead of New Hampshire. And I told you New Hampshire voters were not happy about that. That's my neighbor to the north, Sup. They are not happy about that. And they are pushing back on that. And they're planning to still hold their primary first anyway. And what that means is that Joe Biden's name, it's possible, may not be on that ballot. Now, K-Study QB, you've been killing it with the clips. Listen to how things could work out for Joe Biden in New Hampshire. This is important.
For 50 years, the nomination process has started in Iowa and New Hampshire. This year, the DNC voted to adopt a schedule suggested by President Biden, making South Carolina the first contest on February 3rd and moving New Hampshire to February 6th, the same day as Nevada. The idea being to better reflect the demographics of the national electorate and presumably to give President Biden an advantage.
It has nothing to do with the demographics, and it has everything to do with putting the state first, that Joe Biden actually, it changed the race for him in 2020. It changed the game for him. That is what this is about. If you have him start in a state like New Hampshire that he could possibly lose again, it will make him look bad as an incumbent. That's what this is about.
So far, New Hampshire hasn't agreed and is insisting on going first. In fact, their state law requires that they go 7 days before any other primary. Remember now, in 2020, Biden lost both the Iowa caucus and New Hampshire primary. In New Hampshire, he finished a distant 5th.
Now, you tell me how he became president of the United States. You tell me. You see this? This is just a reminder.
And his candidacy looked dead on arrival for a while. Then House Whip Jim Clyburn endorsed Biden before the South Carolina vote, which he then won, and several moderate candidates dropped out through their support behind Biden. That's how he won the nomination. This week, when CNN's Chris Wallace asked Jim Clyburn if the move was stacking the deck for Biden, Clyburn said this.
I don't think you're stacking the deck. I think you're avoiding embarrassment. And that.
Isn't that terrible? Listen, I don't think they're stacking the deck. He's like, I think they're avoiding embarrassment. If Joe Biden was doing a good job, you wouldn't have to avoid being embarrassed. Clyburn. Jeez.
Is what he is attempting to avoid here. And I would expect anybody to do the same.
So if New Hampshire still goes first, what's going to happen? Joining me now is Jim Garrity, contributing columnist for the Washington Post, senior political correspondent for the National Review, where he writes the daily Morning Jolt newsletter. He also recently wrote this piece for the Post. The primaries haven't started and Biden has a problem. New Hampshire. Jim, thanks for being here. So what are the options that the Biden campaign faces in New Hampshire? What can they do?
Well, the current status seems to be that they're sticking with the proposal that that Biden basically, I won't say forced on the DNC, but he had strongly suggested it, and the DNC generally goes along with what a current president wants to do, and that they were going to say, well, we're not going to recognize the New Hampshire Democratic primary. In the past, we've seen the national party committees do things like only count half a delegate for each delegate from any rogue state that is holding a primary.
Half a delegate from a rogue state holding a primary. Guys, they already rigging shit now. Listen to the rhetoric.
Before the date that the National Committee had permitted. If he does that, if Biden does say we're forfeiting it, we're not competing, we don't recognize it, then the odds of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or I suppose Marianne Williamson winning or finishing with some really high percentage increases dramatically.
So what is it? Is it an embarrassment only? Is it an embarrassment only issue, or is there real concern that if RFK Jr., because I think he'd be the more likely, given those independently minded Granite State voters. If he should win New Hampshire, then all of a sudden there's a cloud of confusion over every other race, or is it just a temporary, egg on the face of the Biden campaign?
Look, I think there's about a high 90-some% chance that Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee in 2024, presuming he stays healthy, presuming he doesn't, God forbid, have something terrible happen.
Because the DNC has already selected him to do so. That's why he can say with such high probability, over 90-something% chance, because they have already chosen.
But if you do lose, first of all, the odds of Biden losing the Iowa caucuses, which are currently scheduled to go forth, is greater than zero, because the Iowa folks Democrats are not thrilled about it. Now, this is the case because they couldn't count the votes back in the 2020 Democratic Iowa caucus. I think there was a broad consensus that Iowa should not go first. But I think New Hampshire Democrats feel like they're being unfairly punished for that their primary ran without a hitch back in 2020.
Yep.
And so wait a second, why are we getting shoved back to fourth place or we're behind South Carolina? And they strongly suspect, with good reason, that this is mostly about they're being punished for not having voted for Joe Biden. And just with that fascinating Jim Clyburn quote you just said, this is all about trying to avoid embarrassment. Michael, with friends like this, who needs enemies? This is all about trying to avoid.
There's one other aspect of. There's another.
New Hampshire, long story short, said, "Hold my beer." And I know I've said this before, but New Hampshire's motto is "Live free or die." Like, they don't really like a lot of regulation, being put on them. So this is like a no-no for them. They don't like this. Like, no, you're not coming in here changing things and telling us what to do. Oh, dear.
Interesting aspect about this, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you need the acquiescence of those New Hampshire Republicans in terms of redoing the date for the New Hampshire primary, right? And Governor Sununu is, thus far, he doesn't want to play ball with this, probably because he hopes for the embarrassment that we're raising the prospect of.
Yeah, and I'd also note that, Kristen Sununu is making noises about running for president on the Republican side. But this is one of those rare areas where, New Hampshire Democrats and New Hampshire Republicans both believe that their state is terrific and it should always go first in the presidential nominating process. So you can probably find 48 other states that would say, no, we should go first. But it's one of those things where this works to New Hampshire Republicans' advantage. It creates this headache for Democrats. New Hampshire Democrats, elected officials, they're not saying, well, this is going to cost Biden New Hampshire in the general election. But it's another headache. Right. It's another complication.
Right.
It doesn't make it any easier. And it is kind of a purpley state that is not a sure thing in the Democratic pile.
It is definitely not a sure thing. And I could tell you, I don't know, maybe I should reach out to should I reach out to Governor Sununu and ask him for an interview, ask him how he feels about this? It is not a for sure thing. New Hampshire is a mixed bag. But how do you feel if there were the election, the general today, or who do you think would win in 2024 if it was between Trump and Biden once again? Let's see those poll results. All right, Eric, I'm ready whenever you are. Wiggity, wiggity. Who will win if the nominees are Trump and Biden? Well, good God, 761 votes. Uh-oh, the votes are changing. I guess some people are just now voting. 83% said Trump, 3% said Biden, and 14% said not sure. Power to the not sure people. What's happening? What's up? What is up? But yeah, maybe I should reach out to Governor Sununu's team and ask him, see if I can interview him, ask him how he feels about this. I'm curious. I am curious. I'm curious. All right. Really quick, I do want to say this before I get into the ballot initiatives. I have 3 to cover for New York State ballot measures. Thank you. I did. Eric told me earlier today, he sent me a text and I wasn't paying attention because I was busy as crap today. Tuesdays are crazy days for me, but thank you guys so much. Apparently at some point or another today, I hit 40,000 subs. You guys are freaking, you guys are freaking awesome. I was not expecting that. I thought the last thing I saw, I thought it said 39.5, maybe. I thought it was 39.5. So I don't know what happened today because I've been all over the place. But thank you so much. We're doing the damn thing. Whoop, 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 whoop. I appreciate it, guys. I really do appreciate you. Thank you so much. Awesome. I never thought I'd get to 40K. I honestly, my goal when I first started the show was 10,000 subs. Not kidding. There's a lot of suppression that's happening nowadays. So it's harder. It's definitely harder. I should do a poll asking you guys again, like, especially those of you who are new, how you found this channel. I should ask people that. I used to do this back in the day, but I should do that again. But you could put it in the comments to let me know how you found me. Like, did you get a recommended video by YouTube? Or did you find me because of Twitter? Did you see me on someone's show? That kind of thing. But whoop, whoop. All right, let's dive into New York. We've been covering the ballot measures for all of the states, and we are now into New York. So 2022 ballot measure for New York. And we're going to explain to you how it works. We have 3 of them for the big Apple states here. New York does not allow its voters the option to place initiatives on the ballot, be they pass their own laws or ratify their own amendments into the New York State Constitution. Roger Meadows has been helping me with this, and he said, we'll see about that. I know that's something that he wants to change. On the legislature, only the legislator can pass laws independent of voter involvement and place initiatives on the ballot using a legislative preferred constitutional amendment for voters to ratify, amending the legislative amendments within the Connecticut Constitution. The first measure, New York Proposal 1, Environmental Bond Measure. This passed by 67.62%, where a yes vote supported issuing $4.20 billion in general obligation bonds for projects related to the environment, natural resources, and water infrastructure, as well as projects classified as climate change mitigation. That's pretty cool. How would the bond be distributed? It says that up to $1.50 billion for air and water pollution reduction projects, wetland protections to address sea level rises, storm surge, and flooding, relocating or retrofitting facilities, green building projects, solar arrays, heat pumps, and wind turbines in public low-income housing areas. This is interesting. Zero emission school buses, street trees, and urban forest programs, green roofs and reflective roofs, and carbon sequestration on natural and working lands. At least 1.10 billion for flood risk reduction, coastal and shoreline restoration, relocating and repairing flood-prone infrastructure and roadways. And this is important because New York City is one of those cities that the flood risk is real in reference to climate change. Up to $650 million for land conservation and recreation plans, programs, and projects. And up to $650 million for projects as well as fish hatcheries. I forgot that part. And related to wastewater, sewage, and septic infrastructure, etc. Who supported this? Governor Kathy Hochul and New York State Labor's Organizing Fund. Some of the organizations that supported it was Environmental Advocates of New York. Interesting. We're going to go on to opposition. Who opposed it? New York State Conservative Party, of course. One of the reasons for opposing it, they said that the New York State Conservative Party cares about environmental conservation, but it also cares about working and middle-class families that are having trouble making ends meet. Almost 1.5 million financially, New York families have fled the state for friendlier tax climbs over the past dozen years. So Roger added commentary and said, does anyone believe conservatives believe they care about working and middle-class families? As Ed Lover used to say, come on, son. And people are leaving the state because, number one, the rent is too damn high. New York City is almost It's ridiculous to live there. I used to live there a couple of years ago, actually many years ago, but it's too expensive to live there. It's not just because of this reason here. That was interesting. Over $4 million was spent to support it. No money was spent to oppose it, in reference to campaign finance. And then we're moving on to, oh, there's only one for New York. I'm sorry. I thought there were 3 for New York. Well, let's look at the donors. The following were top donors to the committee. I think this is important. The Nature Conservancy, Scenic Hudson Inc., NRDC Action Fund, We Act for Change. So you can see some of the donations there. Eric, I think when we clip these, I'll just do New York and North Dakota together because I think I got them mixed up. I think I thought that, yeah. Anywho, we are going to do call in tonight. It's going to be a mixture of topics since we haven't done one since last Tuesday. Yes, since last Tuesday because I was out of town. But I'm not out of town. I had an appointment. Anyway, but I'm going to take a quick break. I'll come back. We'll jump on call in. If you haven't hit the like button, go ahead and get a chance to do that. Like, sub, and share if you haven't done that. Quick break. I'll be back. We'll head over to call in. Eric, I think we just need to do the super chats.
Sure. All right. All right. This is where we give Sabby a quick break before we go into call in. And yeah, we got some chats. And yeah, let me change the banner because we are going into call in. And we're going to, All right. So tonight's call in topic is going to be stuff with the Marianne. Is that the right one? Yeah, that's the right one. With RFK Jr. interview, Marianne staff, and more. Well, anyways, you can talk about anything you want in call in. We want to hear what you've got to say. You can go to the link here. Actually, I'm going to put the call in link in the chat right now, and Sabby usually puts it in as the pinned chat. All right, so you can do call in on your browser, or you can install it on your smartphone. Look up Sabby Sabs, and it'll come right up. You can tell us what you think. And speaking of what you think, let's hit some of these super chats. Thanks for this one. Cool Blue says, I think the circumstances nationwide will tell us not so much the winning candidate, but winning party for the U.S. president in 2024. Usually the case. Yes. And oh yeah, somebody noticed my new mic. Here we go. Yeah, Eric, red mic. Yeah, I got a new mic, and hopefully that sounds pretty good. It's called a Wavo Pod mic. So we'll see how that does. And thanks also for this one, Cool Blue. In 2020, Biden won the U.S. popular vote by 4.45 percentage points. Any national shift towards R's or D's affects the map and determines which party will win. Yeah, I mean, the other thing about that is the whole electoral college system really skews the vote. You can have super close a vote by the popular vote, and as we've seen, you can even have the popular vote swing the other way, and it doesn't even follow the popular vote. It's all the political consultants and all these campaign people and all this stuff. They love the electoral college because they can play their games. They can set up states and look at it state by state, and the media likes it as this kind of a contest between state to state and all this stuff. Whereas, if it's just a popular vote, well, then the people are deciding, and they don't like that so much. Thanks for the super chat. Seeking Freedom. Tim is the Marianne Williamson of the right. Yes, that's a good one. And thanks for the super chat, Lyle. I busted laughing when he said he's running for president. I feel you, Lyle. Thanks for the super chat. And thanks for this one as well, Cool Blue. Think of some past presidential candidates who were not viable. In a way, they did not lose. When they die, the obits can read presidential candidate. Yeah, I mean, that is a thing, a reason why they do that is for the clout. I think the other reason they do it is just that it's so enticing. These political animals, they just can feel it. To be so close to getting to be president, and it's just they can't resist. Taking their shot. And I like this one from Robert Perry saying Tim Scott is running for vice president, and yeah, I thought that was a really good take and a really good look at it. In that sometimes they'll do that, they'll say it's a presidential run and whatnot, but of course what they really, or what, if everything happened to go right, of course they'd love to be president, but if they can slide in to be vice president, and it's only worked for Kamala Harris, and yeah, I think that's probably what they have in mind, Tim Scott, because of course these DeSantis and maybe even Trump would see that as an asset, black guy for vice presidential candidate. And thanks for this one as well, Mr. Cool Blue, or Mrs. Cool Blue, sorry, Ms. Thanks for the super chat. Since election 2008, a Democratic presidential pickup for Obama, these have been looking at exit polls for racial demographics info and acting like these groups all think and feel and vote the same. And that's the game. They're always playing the game, always trying to find which way they can do the puzzle pieces and work it to their advantage. And thanks also for this one, Cool Blue. Part of the reason why young people age 18 to 29 vote in general elections for D's is because ours have not been pursuing them. It's a default. Thanks for those. And let's see what we got here over on the old Rockfins. Thanks for this paid chat on the Rockfins, Roger. Moving things around here a little bit. Thanks for this tipped comment on Rockfin, Roger. That's our fault for never demanding to walk if we don't get what we want, and threaten to vote independent or third, or leaving boxes blank if no other choice. That's our fault for letting fear of GOP rule us. If more than half of blacks registered Indy, then both parties would fight for your vote. Not being able to vote in party primaries wouldn't concern us because we know we have leverage in the general election. Thanks for that one, Roger. And also, thanks for this tipped comment on Rockfin, Crone of Heresy. I voted not sure because I don't know if Biden or Trump will be alive by then. Yeah, on the Sabby's poll, I can see that going for the for not sure. Well, the other thing I've been saying is that I can see Biden not being physically able to run, let's say, or Biden even resigning because of health reasons, or when these what do you call it, these investigations into Hunter and all that stuff come through, and then so he resigns. You get President Harris. They put her in for a year or so, get her established as president, believe it or not. But I mean, if Biden can do it, Harris can do it. Then DeSantis has a strong primary run, and you got a Harris-DeSantis election. I mean, I'm calling it, but we'll see how it comes out. For people finding the Sabby channel, I noticed a number of comments saying they found it through Jimmy Dore, and that was also how I found it in the first place. Yep, a lot of people still saying Jimmy Dore.
Oh, wow.
Jimmy Dore, the door to Sabby. Yes.
Awesome.
Right.
Well, that's cool. Good
All
to
right,
know.
we'll see you in the comment.
All right, guys, we are heading on over to call-in. This is, believe it or not, episode 107. Marianne Staff, RFK Jr. interview, and more. There's so much we discussed this past week, and we haven't done this since Tuesday. So feel free to chat about the recent resignations from Marianne's campaign, the RFK Jr. interview, and more, etc. You can talk about what we talked about tonight, but just hop on over there. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I won't be here tomorrow. I'm off on Wednesdays. I'll be back on Thursday. But again, like I said, they said Ron DeSantis is supposed to announce tomorrow on Twitter via Twitter Space with Elon Musk. So stay tuned for that. Other than that, guys, hop on over to Call-In. The link is pinned to the top of the chat. If you're new, you've never been over there, you can access Call-In from your computer. You don't have to download the app, and you can call in from your computer just by using that link. So, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.